With fireworks and celebration, 2014 for many started with optimism. St. Louis began a year-long 250th birthday celebration, but soon the excitement of January and February faded as St. Louis once again focused on familiar issues that continue to challenge our region with the world watching. A year of pain, a year of opportunity. Join us as we take a look back at 2014. Stay tuned. And on Stay Tuned, you drive the discussion. We bring local experts, journalists, and civic leaders together to have tough conversations for a stronger St. Louis. Tweet us your insights on tonight's topic, and you've got a seat at the table. With a few national experts and a panel of community members, this is the show bringing more light and less heat to the issues that matter. So stay tuned. Even though the weather didn't always cooperate, St. Louis embarked on a grand celebration of its 250th birthday. Our Jim Kircher asked the organizers of STL 250 what this celebration means to the community.
At the end of the year, and we're talking really the end of 2014 for this 250th anniversary, what does success look like to you guys at the end of this year? What do you want to see done?
I think success for us is going to look like vast communities engaged in this celebration of 250 years and the telling of stories of people from very diverse backgrounds on their lives here, the celebration of their families, of the histories that their families hold, and the opportunity for them to be able to share that with others. It's a rich story, and one that so many communities get to tell about their founding, about why people live where they live and what's important about that.
Andrew, for you guys, I mean, besides getting a lot of people to come through the museum, right?
Yeah, I think just speaking personally to me, the one thing that I hate to say is a problem in St. Louis is we are a city of harsh divisions, and that has always been a problem for St. Louis. So if even one person sees this stuff and discovers some sort of flavor they didn't know their city had, or finds a reason to go into a neighborhood they had never been in before in their lives. As a kid who grew up in the county and sort of from a young age was sort of afraid of the city, now like coming in and fully embracing the city, I kind of understand that feeling of discovering I didn't even know this was here.
And I think the cakes will really help that.
And absolutely, yeah. So if this can become a tool, if people can see these things on the sidewalk and all of a sudden notice something that they had walked past a million times before and not ever taken notice, that would be the ultimate goal for me.
Is this something that can really overcome or help even bring to light some of these decisions? Barrett, what do you think?
I mean, if we acknowledge some of our actual history, you talk about driving down streets. When you drive down Delmar, and on one side you have economic prosperity, on the other side you have some people who live in poverty. Or when you're driving when you're driving on Highway 70 past the Arch, and you think about Percy Green and what he stood for. I mean, it's great to talk about 250 years of history, but we have to actually acknowledge some of the issues that we still have today. I mean, we still
have.
Do
you think people aren't acknowledging?
Well, I think they said it at the beginning that we have a very Eurocentric and specifically the English. They come in. There's the 13 original colonies, and then we start moving west. Acknowledging that St. Louis is a much older city than most people would give us credit for. That we have French and Spanish heritage. That Florissant was founded by Spanish.
I think part of that is that we're so in love, and I think justifiably in love with the Lewis and Clark adventure, right? I think that's a great, great story. I mean, it was a great story when they came back. And I think that has kind of pushed aside all of that stuff that came before. And there's an awful lot of good stuff that came before.
Definitely, and I think it's really important to point out that, you know, St. Louis in many ways is kind of a microcosm of the United States at large. All these divisions and racial strife and political infighting and all of these things that are known to be St. Louis problems are really not just St. Louis problems, they're American problems. And there are things that, that apply to many cities in the United States, many major cities that are multifaceted and have different dimensions and layers of stratification throughout their history. So I think, you know, acknowledging it, definitely doing our best to address it, and find solutions, common solutions to these issues is definitely a good thing. But I don't think it's very good to have this self-defeating attitude like we're some anomaly, that we're so much worse and so much more divided than most cities in America. I will reject that.
Well, I think it's also like critical thinking about it. And I think a great example, I was telling someone about the show tonight, and I was saying Bellefontaine Cemetery to me is like a great example of like history in the present and then history in the past. So here you have the cemetery of the wealthiest, some of the wealthiest St. Louisans buried there. But it's north of Mark Twain neighborhood in 2014 and Walnut Park, you know, just to the west of it. And it's like, wow, there's gold in some of these little, you know, in the burials there, and yet around it is some of the most high crime rate area in St. Louis. And so you have to look at it in the present for what it is, and then in the past. And I think it's just critical thinking about places in St. Louis, moments in St. Louis. You have to just look at it from two sides, and
Sarah,
that knowledge helps you.
Depending on the poll, St. Louis sometimes holds the title of most dangerous city in the nation. We sat down with a group of community advocates, political leaders, as well as members of the law enforcement community to have a frank discussion about crime in the St. Louis area.
When you Google St. Louis, crime stats still pop up pretty high up there.
Right. St. Louis has two problems in that respect. Like all big cities, we have a crime problem, and we have to address that problem. We also have a crime statistic problem, and that's a little bit different. Our crime statistic problem has to do with the fact that we are a very, very tightly drawn central city, 76 square miles, in a metropolitan area of 2 million. And the city residents comprise only about 11% of the metropolitan area population. So to become a crime victim in the city of St. Louis, all you have to do is become a victim in the city. That's the numerator of the crime rate, the top part of the fraction. The bottom part is the city population. The city population is relatively small, certainly compared to the potential pool of victims from all around the region. That gives us a crime rate that is artificially higher than it would be in other cities, even cities much like ours, like Memphis. Memphis comprises a little over half of its metropolitan area. So we are, in some sense, disadvantaged by that geographic issue, and that's one area in which a city-county quote-unquote merger, at least with respect to crime statistics, could help a lot with our crime statistics problem. We do also have a genuine crime problem. I think it's important not to confuse the two. It's the crime statistics problem, unfortunately, that drives some of the negative perceptions, and some of those perceptions, I think, are baseless.
Okay, let's talk about crime and punishment a little bit more, and maybe some of the disparities we might see in sentencing. I want to introduce the table Norm White, professor, St. Louis University, criminology and criminal justice. Welcome back to the show. Susan McGraw, law professor at St. Louis University School of Law. And Thomas Harvey, executive director, Arch City Defenders. So we just heard from the judge a little bit about looking kind of behind the curtain of how things go. Do the punishments fit the crime? Are the punishments doing any good?
I think there's a place for punishment, but I think there's also a real opportunity to affect a lasting change in a lot of the people who move through the criminal justice system. I think punishment's part of it, but I think that we need to start thinking about what else we can do, what else we can do to rehabilitate, how we can get people jobs, how we can keep them out of the system in the first place.
city defenders, you take on a lot of work for people who wouldn't have attorneys otherwise.
That's right. And what we see consistently is people who are punished disproportionately to their crime. They are low-level offenders who are punished by not being represented sometimes, by being assessed fines they can't afford, by the incarceration because they are unable to obtain an attorney, which leads to potentially losing their housing, losing a job if they had one, losing touch with their family while they're in there. There are serious consequences to a lot of these low-level crimes that sometimes are prosecuted as a result of some of the hotspot policing we talked about earlier on the show.
But one of the things that I find when I do go to neighborhood meetings, you're absolutely right. They're concerned about violence, but they're also concerned about quality of life issues. I'm a firm believer in the broken windows theory, that neighborhoods that show signs of deterioration, the criminal element feels comfortable to operate in those. So there is value in those low-level arrests, too, if you're trying to change what's been going on systemically in neighborhoods over time. And we need generational solutions. This isn't a 1 or 2 year solution. We need to be getting to the kids in 1st and 2nd and 3rd grade and giving them hope, giving them direction. And then finally, what I would say is we need outcomes that keep people safe. Could be incarceration, could be jobs, could be other things, but we need outcomes that keep people safe. And we, as a society, aren't very good at that right now.
Is that something that can the police departments get to kids at 1st and 2nd and 3rd grade level?
Well, we can, and we've been doing that for years. We've tried that through the DARE program. We try to do the right thing. But I'll tell you this, the police department, the courts, they can't do it by themselves. If we don't have community engagement regarding this, then we're not going to ever be able to achieve what we want to achieve. We saw that with the Lafayette Park area, and we see that all over the place. When our communities become engaged with the police department, and when the police department is proactive in engaging those communities, we can make that positive difference, but that is the key.
And I agree with that, and I think one of the most frustrating things is that with the new local control we have in the city, one of the reasons I supported local control and was so excited about local control is that it would give us an opportunity to take a holistic approach to fighting crime. The police department can't do it by themselves, but we have an opportunity now to coordinate efforts between the police department, the Parks and Recreation Department, St. Louis Public Schools, the Health Department, and the Building Division to board up some of these buildings. I completely agree about the broken window theory too. You look at an area like College Hill and you see why there is so much violence and crime over there, because it looks like an abandoned part of town. And so we have an opportunity now. I don't think the city, I don't think the mayor has used that opportunity and seized that opportunity. And it may take the Board of Aldermen and the Public Safety Committee to push on that to make sure that happens, but that's the only way we're ultimately going to solve it.
Outcomes that keep, I'm sorry, Chief.
Well, I was going to say, I think I could say this now since I'm in a different role. As great as police departments are and police officers are, they can't be tasked with the role of dealing with poverty, dealing with unemployment, dealing with deteriorating neighborhoods. I think the police departments try to play their part in that role, but if a 3-year-old has a lack of education and is impoverished and their family doesn't have employment, that's not necessarily the role of the criminal justice system. And so we have to find another way to deal with those social issues in those neighborhoods before they come to the police officer, before they have to deal with them. And so I think the police department, they do a great job, but I don't know whether or not that is their specialty, right?
I think that, I mean, I would disagree in one way to say that it should be part of the criminal justice system. Maybe not be part of law enforcement, but we're part of the criminal justice system as well. And Sue and I's organizations connect people to social services as well. So it is part of trying to solve the underlying problems that the criminal justice system does play a part in that.
Oh, yeah.
A very important part, because the social service organizations aren't there in the courts. So it takes lawyers like Professor McGraw and other people in the community to make some of those connections, because the poor people we're talking about, they don't have the benefit of private treatment programs like some of the middle class and wealthier people do. They need to be connected to these social service organizations to address mental health problems, substance abuse problems, things that are really driving some of the crimes that we're talking about.
The police have an important role to play in averting crime, preventing crime. And by preventing crime, then you don't have kids racking up huge arrest records, cementing criminal identities, and generating the kind of stigma and reduction in opportunity that is so tragic in this community and other communities. We don't want police simply making arrests. We want police to avert crime.
But I would push back on that a little bit because, again, if we're talking about violent crime, and especially homicides.
I am talking about violent crime.
Well, in violent crimes, you know, if you're living in a city where most murderers get away with murder, it is not a comfortable place to live in. If you live in College Hill neighborhood and you had a rash of violence last year and all of those murderers are still on the street, then that is not a place that you feel comfortable in. And so when it comes to violent crimes, convictions of actual murderers is important.
Of course.
It is absolutely important, but it's actually really unfair to put that at the step of law enforcement or even the criminal justice system. You know, in some respects, the criminal justice system is kind of like the crucible of problems. You know, society's problems come out and are displayed for all to see in the courtrooms and in front of the police officers. But in reality, what precipitated that murder, none of the people at this table had anything to do with. And so the issues really do come to, if we really want to take on crime, we have to do something well before it's a law enforcement issue. We have to do something in the schools. We have to do something to support families. We have to do something to support poverty. And to lay that at the doorstep of law enforcement is really unfair.
But I think what you're talking about is crime prevention, which I completely agree with. But after a crime occurs, it is up to the judicial system, it is up to the police department, it is up to the whole system to see that justice is done.
Except they
and when
can't-
justice is not done, that sends a very negative, damaging message to the community.
Alderman, the number one reason, number one across the board, and I can name you 3 murders in the last month where no one was held accountable, and it's because the people who know about it, saw about it, won't do anything about it.
And do you understand why?
We do understand why, but we need community leaders to encourage people to come forward. We need to work with the community so that they begin, despite the decades of history and the long trauma, we have to begin to trust that system and come forward. The reason the homicides in the city, and I agree with you, it's tragic. I had a brother killed. You know what? In the situation, those families deserve better. But the people who know about it and saw about it are really the ones who can do something about it.
Ambitious and at times ambiguous, the Northside Regeneration Project practically made Paul McKee a household name in St. Louis. This year, with more details, came more questions about the effort to redevelop a large swath of North St. Louis. Jim Kircher spoke with residents about the project and the man behind the plan.
Around here, he owns that property, and he owns the property behind.
Right here, he owns that. Right there, he's just bought. Right down there, he's just bought.
Behind. We own that lot except for.
Paul McKee doesn't own everything in his Northside Regeneration area, but he's just about everybody's neighbor. The question is, how good of a neighbor is he going to be?
So I want to know what's going to happen there. And I don't know that he knows at this point.
This project is so big, it covers so much ground. He spent years secretly buying pieces of property, that's often the way big developers work, and assembled a lot of land before people began to realize that somebody was up to something big. The somebody was Paul McKee, a successful suburban developer. The something big? Well, that's something of a big question now that McKee has jumped many of the legal and political hurdles and is ready to start. If you're looking for something to happen soon, look to the new Stan Musial Veterans Bridge, where it lands in the city just north of downtown.
Yeah, the interchange is right over here. Just, you know, almost could throw a rock at it. Where that stoplight is, that's the
Around here, it's not so much about housing as it is about business. And the owner of the Gateway Auto Repair Shop on 13th Street is glad the long wait is over.
Basically, I'm looking at a lot of new, you know, maybe like a Quick Trip down here, maybe an IGA store they're talking about, new properties, they're talking about fixing some roads up, and there's going to be 4 sections of the McGee project, which is A, B, C, and D. This one's A. This is the first one they're going to break ground on, and it's supposed to go June 6th.
Buying land around a new, busy interchange, that seems like a smart business investment. Buying lots of land in a depressed urban environment, that's really the part that has people wondering and hoping that McKee means what he says.
I see a lot of people happy, a lot of people moving here, a lot of the existing people having opportunity for jobs. There's not a supermarket within 7.5 miles, so I see that coming back. I see green.
McKee is talking about doing a lot of things: new businesses, new jobs, new housing, bringing back an area that long ago began to lose jobs and population. It has a lot of empty lots and abandoned buildings, but it also has some new housing and some industry. It is not empty, but it is predominantly African American. And when white people come in with big plans for a black neighborhood, that brings back memories. In the 1950s, the densely populated Mill Creek neighborhood was cleared. People were relocated for commercial and industrial development that just didn't happen as promised. And while there are a lot of important ways that this is not the same story, it still makes a lot of people uneasy.
I grew up in Mill Creek. My family grew up in Mill Creek. We have a long history.
Lois Connolly is the founder and director of the Griot Museum of Black History on St. Louis Avenue. So the talk of what Paul McKee would like to do here, how did you first react when you heard what was going on?
Actually with mixed emotions, because I've had some experiences both as being moved out of a neighborhood, out of a community because of a redevelopment project, and also working for a developer. I can't be angry at him or any developer who wants to make the area better.
We look at that burned out building over there.
Good Lord, it needs to come down. But next to it are people who live in those houses who have
house.
been there for years.
Yeah.
And so what happens to those people? And I'm sure there's some concern on their part. You feel a little less intimidated if you're a part of the process and you have some input. Yeah. But when people just sort of feed it to you and you have no decision making, it's a little harder to swallow.
McKee has met with community members since the plan became public. He says he's working with and in the interests of the people who live here. But there are really lots of areas involved and lots of interests. Some people, for example, want to know if and when McKee will save the historic Clemens House. Something will have to be done soon if it's not already too late. But this is a long-term project, longer than the 10 years it took to assemble all the land. And a lot of the early work will focus on infrastructure, which means that change won't look much like change, except in a few places, like the New Bridge Interchange north of downtown.
Most of the businesses I'm talking to, they're happy the north side's getting rebuilt. You know, there was like a tunnel over here that's already gotten filled up. The neighborhood, I've been on here 25 years, it is so much better than it used to be, and it's just getting better and better as it goes. That's what I see.
Education is a major issue for the St. Louis area, and the debate over school accreditation and transfer was one of the most talked about events of the year. 2 school districts in the area are not accredited, allowing students to transfer to better performing schools. We took a look at the impact on one family that decided it was best for their children to transfer.
My morning starts at about 5:40. As of right now, I'm a full-time nursing student. I attend Chamberlain College of Nursing for my BSN, and my husband is a supervisor at U.S. Bank. I have 3 daughters. They are 14, 10, and 8. The district that we currently live in is Riverview.
Hey, time to get up.
They originally were in Normandy School District. Hearing that, you know, if you don't live in a school district that's accredited, you can transfer your children, I kind of jumped on it. It was a great opportunity. Our schedule is very hectic. Some mornings I have to be at school at 7:40. Some days I don't have to be there until 10. And some days he's there, he has to be at work at 7, and some days he, doesn't have to be at work until noon. About 6:20, my oldest is already out the door. My husband drops her off. So we kind of just alternate and try to make it work as best as we can. The reason why we made the decision to send them to Ferguson Florissant was because Normandy kind of was going under a little bit. It was rumors of bankruptcy, and when I kind of want to transfer them anyways, just because I wanted them to be closer to home. If I could change the transportation portion, it would definitely be to where the school district would come and pick children up that did not live in the district, because it's a struggle trying to get them to school every day and picked up every day. But, you know, them being in an accredited school district to me is worth it. I just feel like, you know, as a parent, you have to do what's best for your children. And for me and my husband, transferring our children to us was the answer, the best decision. I don't think because I stay in a Riverview school district that I should be looked at as if, well, you should move to a different district where your kids can get a better education. No. We are great parents. We have great kids. They got progress report cards today, and they got all A's and B's on those report cards.
As far as my favorite classes, I would say it's lit comp. But math is my easy subject. Like, you tell me one time and I got it. In my old school, it was like growing up around the people, so it wasn't hard to be friends. But coming to high school is like totally different. You're not little anymore, so you can't just walk up to someone like, do you want to color with me? You know.
They had been in Normandy School District from preschool up until we transferred them. The media coverage as of right now, you know, is saying that they're bankrupt and they may be closed down in April.
I'm not the type of person to actually watch the news, so all I would see her most of the end of the summer, like writing down schools and calling on the phone every day, and I'm like, what is she doing? At first, it was like really lonely, and I would come to school like with earphones in, just sitting around. But a couple of my friends came with me, so once I found them, it was kind of better. Now, since the second semester, I warmed up to it, and I think it's a good school.
If Riverview or Normandy regain their accreditation, I definitely would want to keep my children in Ferguson Florissant. They've made friends. I love the teachers. The principal is great. I haven't had any problems.
All A's, 1 B. What do you think is the challenge?
If the law is giving us the opportunity to put our children in a school district that's going to allow them to get a better education from an accredited school district, then I say go for it. And that's what we did. And I don't regret my decision at all.
The history of St. Louis changed on August 9th, 2014, when a Ferguson police officer shot and killed an unarmed black man in the Canfield Green apartment complex. The police shooting of Michael Brown and later the grand jury decision to not charge the officer sparked protests that still continue. So much of the Ferguson conversation can break down along racial lines, leaving many to ask, have we made as much progress as we'd like to think?
I'll start it off, though, with something that we heard on Twitter. Some young people saying, we want to be the leaders, but teach us. You said something interesting, Liz, in the green room there.
For what it's worth, I feel like as a member of my generation that we owe young African American children of color an apology. I mean, I was listening to what you were saying about 18-year-olds saying, you know, why should I do this? You know, I'm just going to get killed anyway. Why should I get a high school diploma? We have left this generation in the worst shape that any generation has ever been in before. Our young people, if they get arrested by a cop that's just looking for them, they can't get a job because they have to put it on their application. I mean, we allowed that kind of legislation to pass. We didn't teach our young people to fight. Thurgood Marshall said after the Brown versus Board of Education, he was like, okay, yes, this is done. We got the law, we're going to win. What he also said was, I didn't realize the opposition to Brown versus Board of Education. In other words, we didn't teach anybody how to fight after the win. And that's what I want to apologize to the young generation, because we did you wrong. We did not teach you how to fight. We didn't teach you the significance of fighting. We didn't teach you that there is a fight after the win.
But isn't this country so much better than the 1960s and the civil rights movement of that era?
Yeah. It is in some real ways, and yet we're still seeing some real struggle, right? And we have to acknowledge that. And I think to this point that you just made, Paulo Freire, who's the author of Pedagogy of the Oppressed, teaches educators and tells us that education, and a strong education, can actually be the means to your liberty. It can be the means to your freedom if we teach people how to embrace that struggle, if we teach our young people how to lead. But in order to do that, we have to affirm them. All of these messages that they're receiving right now tell them that their lives are of no consequence and of no value, right? Why should I graduate? Why should I go to college? Because Mike was doing all of those things, and yet he's still dead. And so we have to affirm our young people if we want them to lead us, and make them feel a value so that they can say, yes, I am ready to stand up and lead, and yes, you are giving me the right tools to do so.
So I think that brings where racial profiling happens outside of the police department, like in our schools, like when we have IEPs for 3-year-olds. Absolutely. When we have kids being overly represented in suspension and expulsion rates, when we have in-school suspension with no real teachers in the classroom. So, you know, she said it was hard because it is hard. I mean, it's hard regardless of your parents' educational levels. It's hard for all parents of color in particular. And so if we were having a broader conversation, we could talk about what does racial profiling look like at school? Right. And who gets lumped into which groups really quickly? And how does that impact their life? How does that impact their fight? How does that impact their conversation? So I think one of the really great things that came out of this is the voiceless got heard. And so this is an opportunity to expand that.
Something else that I wrote down from that interview that Anne Marie did from the young people, he said, they asked if he was hopeless, because last week there was a tweet that resonated with a lot of people, including Reverend Starsky Wilson, who it said they felt hopeless. This young man said he didn't feel hopeless, but he was tired. He said it's tiring. Mm-hmm. And there may be some people that are new to the tired feel, or are new to this burden.
Yeah.
Right. So
I can touch on that. Last week when we were protesting, and I've been out there every day, to the point where I'm tired as we speak. But there was a night where I went back to the protest grounds to get one of my friends that got left behind. We have a rule, no man, no woman left behind. So we went back to get him. When I left, it was a completely peaceful protest. We were marching, nothing was wrong. When I got back, the National Guard had guns and tanks and dogs aimed at everybody's face, and everyone was huddled up on the parking lot of the McDonald's lot, and it was one of the scariest moments of my life. Like, I realized we could have died that moment. And as a person that's registered people to vote, I was one of the biggest advocates of Barack Obama, both terms. And as a person that encouraged people who typically didn't want to vote to go vote, that very moment, I looked up to the sky and said, God, I don't know what to do, God. I can't give you anything else. I led these people to the slaughter. So it's a very hurtful feeling. We try to get people engaged into the system only for the system to say, you know what, I really don't care about you. And that's what it feels like.
And Art, remember, you asked me what were some of the things that I was hearing out there, and from people in my circle, from people in my generation, people were telling me that they couldn't stop crying. People were telling me that they were in so much pain over this. These weren't people that were out in the streets. These were people that were just seeing this stuff coming back again and seeing mothers losing their children. There is so much pain out here as a result of this, and people can't shake it. It's been a very, very extremely painful life experience.
One of the things that I kept hearing over and over again, people who live in Ferguson, this isn't who we are. This isn't who we are. And it reminded me of a sports term. You are what your record says you are. That's right. And our community is what our record says it is right now, and it's not a pretty picture. A minister a couple of weeks ago, his sermon was titled, What to Do When You Don't Know What to Do. Do you have the sense that people are searching for what to do, that they want to do something, but they're not quite sure what it is?
I think people are getting organized, though. That's the thing that I will say about the Mike Brown saga, whatever you want to call it. I think people are finally, the light bulbs are going off in people's heads. I see young people every day that come by the office and say, hey, what can I do? How can I do it? Where can you put me in at? I don't think that the situation up close is as standstill of a situation as it appears to be from afar. Even during the protests, people were registering people to vote. People were taking senior citizens to the grocery store. I think that that's the part of the story that isn't as sexy as the other part, so it's not really promoted as much. But It's more entertaining to watch people throwing a brick through a window, throwing a Molotov at a police officer. So that's the stuff that, people latch on to. You don't see that every day. It's not as enjoyable to watch it. Yeah.
And something I saw that you just reminded me of were some older gentlemen. I recall it was 3 African-American gentlemen and a white guy. I think that was like, let's say 4 or 5 gentlemen. They all lived in Ferguson. They were out there the second weekend after the folks had broken into buildings, and they were cleaning up in the rain. And what I found interesting was they kind of knew each other. A couple of them, I think, hadn't seen each other since high school, but they started getting like, this was entertaining. They got pen and paper to exchange phone numbers. Like, who does that, right? In the rain, no less. But they were feeling motivated to get involved. I'm paraphrasing, but they said our young people need us. They need some men to step up.
And that's the beauty of it. It takes 80% of the energy just to get people motivated and to have that will that's there. So imagine the power of a movement in a time where people want to do something and they don't know what to do. Imagine what solutions can come out of that if we just listen to the right folks and we get the right movement going. This happens in all movements. It happens all the time. There's going to be some unorganization at first. There's going to be some pain. There's going to be some kind of focus on what's next. And then when you get that next step, if that will is still there, there is nothing that can stop it.
And I think that there's a sustainability to this movement that has never existed before in our history. Social media. We have the ability to, I saw you back there tweeting and taking pictures and doing all of that stuff and moving this conversation along. And because the issue is not an issue that is unique to Ferguson, this is an issue that is a national issue, that helps with the social media to move this issue, to keep this issue out there, and to even change the tone. Social media changed a lot of talking points. Social media has kept a lot of things in focus and will continue to do so. So we're lucky to live at this time with the advent of social media.
The peninsula of the table can be silencing.
Well, I think social media kind of democratizes everything because everybody has the power of the finger, and they can tweet what they're seeing.
You don't need ad time.
Right, you don't need ad time. You don't need to be somebody who is influential as long as you've got a tool. And in this
something
case,
that people
the
want,
phone.
and something with some substance.
But this is something I mentioned earlier. I think that the success or failure of post-Ferguson will depend less on the messengers and more on the keeping the message going. Because I've said before, the search for a leader, I always think hurts any movement, because then you're depending on one person to kind of tell you what to do. It's easy for people just to do what somebody else tells them. It's harder for everybody to kind of discuss, okay, what are we pushing for? And I think that the success or failure of all of this that everyone's talking about in the soul searching they have now is whether or not people move ahead and push what the ideas are, what the concerns are, stuff that's been around for 150 years that maybe we really need to get solved, as opposed to deciding, who is the star of the week,
But I think that we need to look at policies. I think we need to stop saying, one thing or one group, and really look at what the policies and structures are and change those. We have hate crimes that are federal crimes now because of violence that has occurred. And so if we're looking at this violent moment, if we're looking at it in schools and hospitals and police departments, then we change the policies, and then it doesn't matter who's the leader, because the whole rule has changed. I mean, we talked about the demilitarization of the police force. That's a policy change, so that tanks and dogs and gas is never used on young people ever again in this country. That's a policy change. I think we need to really look at what the strategies are, not to just change our language and feel really good and hug each other, but make it a law that this can't happen anymore.
But remember, we have to do the fight after the law is passed, because we have a lot of laws. If every law was followed right now, we wouldn't be here. So yes, we need to make policy change, but we have to make certain that those same institutions have the will and have the content of people that are going to enforce those laws, and we need to remain engaged so we make certain that that happens.
Everything we're talking about everything we're talking about requires proximity, right? We have to stay close enough to what's actually happening to continue to be fired up in order to change the policies, in order to change the institutions. It is important that TEF is out there every single night. It is important that 9 Network is highlighting youth voice to make sure that we understand the story. Dr. Jason Purnell at WashU likes to call it intensive listening. We have to intensively listen to what's happening such that we don't let this thing fade out and that we actually have the fuel and the fire to keep pressing on those systemic issues.
Take us home, Art.
One of the conversations that's been taking place is started with the realization that out of 53 police officers in Ferguson, only 3 of them were African American. And you made an interesting observation the other day when I interviewed you. You said diversity of the police department is fine, but if you don't change the institutions and the way those institutions interact with the public, it lessens the impact of that diversity.
Yeah, right. I don't. That would be a welcome first step. I said this last week when I was here. It'd be a welcome first step to add African American officers to the Ferguson Police Department and to have elected officials be more reflective of the population. But if you just do that, you're not changing the structures that are already in place. And I would give you an example of Pine Lawn, where, based on our study, there's a black mayor, a black prosecutor, and a black judge, and they have the exact same problems that Ferguson does, and that Bell Ridge does, and that Florissant does. So it's not just having people of color and being part of the conversation, it's changing the broader system. And the danger, I think more or less what we're talking about is getting co-opted by the system. Like there's one step to fight to get into it, which is an important first step. And then there's, I'm in it, and it's a feather in my cap to be a judge. It's a feather in my cap to be a prosecutor, and I don't want to lose that because it's some money and it's some power. And if you don't keep fighting after that, it won't change the structure. That will not change the structure at all.
What's the old statement? Absolute power corrupts absolutely.
Right.
Right.
Art, last word, but I think we've run out of online time. Who knew?
Can you do that?
The backs of the men that are holding the cameras certainly have a limited capacity.
Well, at the risk of stating the obvious, this is a defining moment for our local community, for our region, for our country. And the unanswered question right now is, will we seize the day? Will we take advantage of this opportunity, or will we let it pass?
I believe so. I mean, you see an energy in young people that we haven't seen ever. I mean, people have come from all over the world, not just the country. I've seen people in Palestine post hands up, don't shoot pictures. And people in Brazil through Mike Brown rallies. And I think that's because oppressed people all over the world have been waiting for oppressed people in America to say, hey, we identify with you. We know what you're going through. We have your back. And now I think this sets a different tone for a different generation. I think definitely this will continue in different forms and fashions.
Stay Tuned produced 3 episodes dedicated to better understanding the situation in Ferguson as well as the larger issues regarding race. This story has captivated the entire nation and was the catalyst for protest all over the country and even worldwide. Last week, Missouri executed its 10th inmate of the year on death row, but the number of executions was only part of the story. We teamed up with a journalist who is at the forefront of the controversy concerning the drug Missouri uses for lethal injection.
Since November, Missouri officials have tried to hide where they're getting their execution drugs. This redacted license was key in a St. Louis Public Radio investigation that revealed the state was resorting to an out-of-state pharmacy that wasn't licensed to sell in Missouri. Under normal circumstances, a pharmacy selling its drugs without a license in the state could be committing a felony. In his deposition shown here, a high-ranking corrections official testified that he was actually driving across state lines with more than $11,000 to pay the pharmacy, all in cash. This revelation led to a lawsuit in which that pharmacy agreed to not sell for at least one of Missouri's executions. That's when the state said they'd found another willing pharmacy. So far, little is known about this new supplier. It led a federal judge to declare that, based on the minimal information the state has provided, it could be that Missouri is relying on nothing more than a high school chemistry class. The state has now carried out 2 executions, that of inmate Michael Taylor and Jeffrey Ferguson, since it's found its new supplier.
And I want to mention, too, we want your voice, your thoughts, your insights in tonight's conversation. So find us with hashtag StayTunedSTL. Okay, Chris, so we're talking a lot about injection drugs, and I guess too, I just want to set up that these are kind of separate issues. I mean, I've seen you there covering this. There are very emotional issues. We're going to hear more from the county prosecutor later.
Mm-hmm.
We're going to debate different issues, but specifically your reporting has been, is it fair to say, more about the way the state does its business?
My reporting has mostly been about the state's actions. It's looking at it more from sort of a macro level, saying the state's, obviously drastically increased the number of people that it's been executing, the rate that it's been doing it, and looking at, the lengths that it goes to, specifically in obtaining the drug, which has been a problem for not only Missouri, but a lot of other states.
Okay, let's start there then. Why is that? Why has it been hard for Missouri to get its hands on this one single drug, which is?
Pentobarbital. The problem is that virtually no drug manufacturer wants its products to be used in lethal injection, either for moral reasons or for public relations reasons. As a result of that, you have a lot of states, or at least several of them that are carrying out the death penalty still, turning to things called compounding pharmacies. Compounding pharmacies aren't like drug manufacturers. They aren't regulated by the Food and Drug Administration. They're instead regulated by state boards of pharmacy. And the drugs that they make have a significantly higher failure rate, which is problematic because obviously the drug has to be of a certain quality if you're going to use it to carry out an execution, or it could go wrong.
You want it to work.
Right.
And there's no way to test it, I guess.
And the quality of the drug really varies from batch to batch. And many would argue that it's very contingent upon the identity of the supplier.
You want to know who's supplying it because they have a track record?
If they have a track record of making shoddy products, or if they maybe aren't licensed. And in fact, as we mentioned earlier, we had an investigation at the end of December where we found out that Missouri's drug supplier was not licensed in the state of Missouri.
But before we get into that, I want to know the state has its reasons for not wanting you to know, or anyone to know, where they're getting these drugs.
Well, the state contends that if the identity of the supplier were to get out, that the supplier wouldn't want to sell for executions. It's why states go to such great lengths to keep them secret. It's why a high-ranking corrections official is, driving to Oklahoma, or was driving to Oklahoma with $11,000 in cash.
To buy the drugs.
To buy the drugs. So there are a few different reasons. I mean, one, the state says that it's unpopular for this supplier to get out, if their identity were to get out. And the other reason, they cite safety concerns. But
the same reason that the curtains are pulled, as Bill is describing, and you don't see who's carrying things out in the room.
Right. And, Missouri does have statute that protects the members of the execution team who are directly carrying out the execution. The state expanded that definition in October to try to include the people who are supplying it. That's something that's very much contentious and not at all settled in the courts right now.
Okay, so you still found out who we believe was supplying this. What did you find out?
So, yeah, we were able to find out ultimately because the Department of Corrections made a mistake. They gave out more documents. They didn't redact everything that they should have. We found out that the supplier was an Oklahoma compounding pharmacy that wasn't licensed in the state of Missouri. We also found out that this pharmacy had been cited in the past for increasing the dosages of drugs and ordering pharmacists to shred the prescriptions. We had also found out that they had been cited in the past for creating a copy of an FDA-approved drug, which compounding pharmacies are not supposed to do, and there's a law against it. So there were some problems with this pharmacy. We reported their identity, and then a few weeks later, an inmate who was on death row sued that pharmacy. They went to court, but they reached a settlement that was out of court. So we ultimately don't know the exact terms of that settlement.
So are they still supplying? This has been out there prior to yesterday's execution.
So in February, they reached a settlement, the terms of which were confidential. But from everything that I've been told, they agreed to not sell for that specific inmate's execution. Nothing I've read seems to indicate that they've agreed to not sell for any of Missouri's future executions or for other states, for that matter.
So Missouri's had to go elsewhere?
Yes. In February, the state said that they'd found another willing pharmacy. And ultimately, at this point, we don't know anything about this pharmacy. I've asked several times to see the license, to no avail.
St. Louis may not be Silicon Valley, but our growing tech scene certainly is something to be proud of. Companies in all sectors hoping to bring the best and brightest to the region struggle with the city's perception across the nation. We discussed how to attract and retain more St. Louis talent.
Because you once said that there was a real shortage of talent in St. Louis. Do you still say that?
Sure, there still is shortage, but we're addressing it. So what we've done with Launch Code is we've made arrangements with 100 of the top employers to take candidates that don't have traditional credentials. So these people are still skilled, but they don't have degrees or a certain amount of work experience, but they can still do the job. So we've placed 42 of these people already at these major companies, and to date, every one of them has kept the job. So we were expecting some of them would wash out. We might have 80 or 90%. It's been 100%, which means we're not trying hard enough. So.
Well, but okay, so does that play into the conversation we're talking about now in terms of bringing talent?
Yeah, a vigorous ecosystem needs talented people. So. Period. I mean, all the stuff that we're doing here, it depends on smart, hardworking people.
And what do those, okay, if the ecosystem needs them, what do they need?
They need fun, great jobs.
And is this about making St. Louis cool, or is this a bigger mission here? Does this have implications for those who have a great job right now?
Well, you know, the cool comes with it, you know. It's not about necessarily defining the city as cool or trying to, you know, follow some trend. It's just a question of, you know, vibrant people who are making things and building new things are excited. They take responsibility for their communities. You know, it emboldens the entire ecosystem. So that's what you want. You want that sort of synergy that you've seen in other cities. We started here in St. Louis as well.
I know you are an optimist, so I would maybe ask you, is St. Louis a good place to do business? But maybe that's not even the right question.
It's a great place to do business, but it could benefit from more talented people. And that is a statement that applies all over the world. I was in Rome last week advising the Italian government on exactly the same thing. They're having the same problem in Europe, having the same problem in Silicon Valley. It's a worldwide problem. We're just trying to address it locally better than any place else in the world.
But is this an important enough issue that we need a really a very concerted effort to take on this issue of talent attraction and retention? Or is this just so we can have a more colorful neighborhood and just a kind of more vibrant quality of life?
We see it as more than just a cultural issue. I'm on the board of Arch Grants, which is an organization which was built entirely on the premise of the economic value of attracting new people and new talent to St. Louis. We actively try to recruit entrepreneurs from all over the world and have brought in entrepreneurs from all over the world with the purpose of building an entrepreneurial ecosystem to create a creative culture, specifically in the city, in downtown St. Louis. So it's something that we believe strongly in, and we give away $1 million a year, $20,000, $50,000 grants to incent companies and the founders of these companies to come to St. Louis and become part of this community and part of this culture to develop their company. And we believe that this is critical to creating the next big companies and the next big opportunities for the future of St. Louis.
Have expectations, workplace expectations changed? Are those shifting, or what do these talented people demand?
One of the things that Betsy said that I really agree with is they want to see more people like them. So if you're attracting entrepreneurs, they want to see more entrepreneurs. If you're attracting foreign-born talent, they want to see more foreign-born talent. So to your question, it is critical for the growth of the region is to have a diverse talent pool.
Well, Katie and I work in the space of perception and shaping perception, and one of the things that hasn't been talked about tonight has been kind of how perception of a region is shaped. And one of the biggest challenges with St. Louis has been kind of, that I've seen in my 8.5 years here, has been kind of this historic parochialism that has plagued kind of every corner of it, that I've actually seen really dissipate over the last 5 years. And as a result, I think we're finally getting to the point where, as a region, we're ready to kind of address the issue of shaping perception. And where perception is shaped today is online through search engines. And because there's never been kind of a collective regional effort to shape the way that people perceive the region from outside, that's really never been done, because no one's really ever had, I don't want to say the authority, but taken a budget and said we need to really focus on the entire region. And so Now you have people like Katie worked for Danny Coleman, working with Joe Reagan, working with Mayor Slay, working with Charlie Dooley, working with Mark Kern, that are looking at this region as a whole and saying, how can we really shape the perception of the greater St. Louis region to help bring talent here, to bring investment here, to bring jobs here, to bring large companies here, to keep the squares of the world here. So I mean, looking at it from more of a 50,000 square foot view, I think that's one of the biggest issues that needs to be addressed, and that's going to really have a huge impact on talent. And fortunately, I think it's something that is going to be addressed in the next year.
The more involved in the city I've gotten, the more I realize this fits what I want in a city. The distinct neighborhoods have been really compelling to me, and I think that actually helps to solve the Google problem. If you're not Googling St. Louis and getting city and county and trying to suss those things out, if you're searching, I've heard of this neighborhood, I've heard of the Hill, and you start looking up the Hill, you start looking up Cherokee Lemp, you start looking up all of the other areas, all of a sudden you aren't getting crime results. You're getting the bars and restaurants in that area, you're getting Yelp results, you're getting the things that inspire you to not only to move somewhere, but to invest in that community. Those distinct neighborhoods are a really compelling feature of the city, and I think the more that we can kind of feature those both in media and as we just talk to people outside, instead of saying St. Louis, but talk about the specifics. Once you can sell someone on the idea that what they want is here, you inspire them to find those things. I didn't, for instance, I love hiking, and I didn't know about the Greenway until I moved here. That's really cool. If I had known about that when I moved here, I would have been really excited, and I would have moved closer to it. But getting those things out there and just letting people know what's available is critically important, because that's how you get someone who has an offer in Chicago, New York, St. Louis, and Minneapolis to go, St. Louis is a really compelling option, because it is a really compelling option. They just don't know it yet.
I'll go back to something I said earlier, which is I think this is a town where you can really make it your own. I think that when you figure out how you want to plug in, and people are looking for that, you don't just want to be a pawn in the whole game. You want to go to a place that you can make an impact and be a part of a community. And I think that's something that's very compelling for people to want to stay here, is that when you get plugged in, you can be right at the center of things, and you can feel like you are really driving the conversation in that area.
It's been quite a year for St. Louis, from a birthday celebration to age-old challenges shown in a new light. The stories and conversations that will hold our attention next year are unknown, but whatever they are, we promise to bring more light and less heat to those conversations. So we hope in 2015 you'll stay tuned.